Joining us today in the studio, once again, the chief of the Battle Creek Police Department, Jim Blocker, is back with us this morning. Morning, sir.
Good morning, Richard. It's always good to be here.
Thank you for coming yet again. We might have to start writing you a paycheck. Keep coming in here.
Well, I enjoy it.
We appreciate the time you give us. The point today was to talk a little bit about the panhandling ordinances that have now been approved by the City Commission. We've had a number of discussions on this issue from a number of different angles. You were one of the first. So with several folks, we've circled back now that we know the direction of this thing. So one of the things that you mentioned before this vote, before we even knew what the verbiage was, et cetera, was that the aggressive panhandling situations that you might encounter left you with little latitude in trying to respond. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say. And so what was missing was in really this seam between what is aggravated stalking or aggravated behavior and what is free speech and what is allowed. And so the direction from the federal court was pretty clear in that if you're going to have a law, which you can have, cities can regulate this type of behavior, then it has to be more specific. It has to be very clear, and it has to be delineated along the lines that protect both free speech, but also the right of safe passage and the safety and security of folks allowed to come and go. Mm-hmm. And so with that in mind, the city, our city legal staff, I think, did a phenomenal job of looking at cases that have since been through the courts since the federal ruling in 2013, and so they sort of weave the needle through this process, and we came out with language that is very similar to many of the other surrounding communities that have gone unchallenged, and what this does is it gives us sort of that foothold. It gives us a law in which that's what we do as law enforcement officers, is we respond to something that may or may not be against the law. And so this language assists in that a great deal.
Mm-hmm. What would be an example of a situation that you'd faced in the past? So maybe there was a call about an aggressive panhandler, and prior to this, how would you have responded to that?
Well, prior to this, when we did have laws on the books that were ruled, constitutionally vague in terms of what they meant and how they could be defined, we would go and speak to the person, identify them, and conduct an investigation, if you will. And that, of course, most of the time, and even when we look back at some of our numbers rarely resulted in any sort of citation or an arrest unless it escalated into something more than it was, or where it was more than likely going to go. And of course, you could fill in the gaps of whatever those instances may be. And so as we approached this particular footing, we were very careful to make sure that we weren't saying you can't ask for help. We weren't saying you can't trick or treat. We weren't saying that you can't walk around downtown and play the Pokemon game, which I think is phenomenal. What we were really saying is we're going to put more scrutiny on behavior in which somebody is actually invading this space of somebody else in specific areas. For example, at an intersection where you can't maybe look right or left, or near an ATM machine, or right outside of an entrance. So someone has to feel they have to walk this gauntlet, if you will, this perceived gauntlet to come to or from a place of business. Mm-hmm. Those are the areas that we thought and we believed we needed to regulate.
Chief Jim Blocker is here from the Battle Creek Police. We're talking about the panhandling ordinances that have now passed at City Commission. We're back in a moment to pick up where we leave off. WBCK, Chief Jim Blocker with the Battle Creek Police here with us this half hour on the show. So you talk about these ordinances allowing you to focus on certain areas where aggressive panhandling may have been an issue in the past, and this gives you some better footing. So does this mean then that there are new patrols in those areas watching for this? Does this allow you to be now on the offense to intervene if you see something that qualifies as this?
Well, it certainly allows us to intervene. Not that we wouldn't have intervened before.
Right.
At least, though, now we have the tools in place to actually do something about it, which is really what we require. But I tell you, one thing that we have said throughout this entire effort is that this is a tool, but not the strategy to deal with homelessness, to deal with panhandling, to deal with poverty. You know, this idea that this is the silver bullet that's going to address many of these issues. We're not going to, just like drug addictions and so many other issues that we deal with as a local community and society, we aren't the solution.
It just allows you then to proceed in some way, issue the citation if you need to, and so on. It doesn't, as you point out, address the greater issue. So how do you address this then with the officers who might often encounter this situation?
Officers, I think, know more than just about any member of community that you're not going to be able to cite your way through this. You know, the folks that you would want to cite, and the fact that we've knocked this down to a civil infraction is a very strong indication in terms of our perspective of this particular issue. I mean, it's problematic. One, you already know they're not going to be able to pay the fine.
Right.
And we deal with that quite a bit. So that is not the option of first resort. And more importantly, where in the world do you put the address? You know, there are just some real practical challenges that officers recognize. But again, this is about getting a toehold in the problem and being able to give officers the tools to actually address it. Officers know where the resources are in this community, and they know where they can try to direct or funnel folks that truly are in need, that truly need help. And let's also agree that not everybody involved in these particular issues want the help that we have to offer. So what we're doing right now, the law has passed. We have 10 days before it goes into effect, and it will go into effect next week. Is internally we have, of course, our training bulletins where we will talk about this and the philosophy behind it. But also we will be meeting, even starting today, we will be going to various centers. We have officers going to various centers and shelters around the community that are going to talk about this. And not just organizations, you know, concrete structures around the city, but officers also know where these homeless groups are and where they live, and they're also going to go to those locations as well.
And how will they handle that? The idea then is to inform them this has changed and you should know this.
Well, that's exactly right. I think they have a right, and we have an obligation to tell them how things have changed and how we're going to approach it. But I also want to make a clear distinction here, as best as you can in this situation, is that members of our community without a home, the homeless, I don't know if they're the issue that we're really addressing here. What the issue that we're really addressing is folks that are coming in from other communities up and down the corridors of our interstates, going from community to community, staying in hotels, typically near interstates or near major roadways and corridors. They're walking out to these intersections. They're collecting a large amount of money, which I would think is a large amount of money, and then they're going to move on after a period of time. And that's really the groups that we are focusing on. One of our downtown officers said it best. He says, Chief, the biggest concern aren't the folks that we know, it's the ones that we don't know. They're not the ones that are obeying the rules or the norms of society. Whether we had a structured rule in place or a law in place before or not really didn't matter. There were norms, and even our known population understood what those norms were or those rules of behavior were.
Chief Jim Blocker's here. I'm glad you brought that up. In fact, we'll pick up on that notion of the transient nature of some of this coming up in just a minute on WBCK. A few more minutes with Chief Blocker here on WBCK. You made a remark before the break there that it's the activity with panhandling activity with folks then you have a better sense for what their situation is. It's the ones whom you don't recognize that raise a question mark.
Well, that's right. And I said this certainly at workshops and several city commission meetings, is that we know most of the members of our homeless population. We know where they stay. We kind of know what their schedule is, and that we know how they operate. And we feel that's very safe and secure, and they understand what the rules are. They know who the officers are, and I think everyone is comfortable with that arrangement, if you will. But the concern we have is with folks that we don't know, that transient population that are coming into the community. And why this is important, it's not just that we don't know them, it's why are they here? In one case, for example, we discovered as we looked into, it wasn't a panhandling violation, but that is why this group was in town. It was, some of them were panhandling. Well, as we looked into this, there were drugs in the hotel room, and then ultimately we found that this was one of our more significant human trafficking cases.
Wow.
And so there are folks out there that are being victimized, that are being potentially forced to stand on a corner to support themselves with this group. And I think this is the most significant point when it comes to safety, security, and orderliness here in our community and in society, is that gives officers that foothold, that foot in the door, to be able to start to investigate. Do I have simple panhandling, or do I have something so much more?
Peeling the layers of the onion, as they say, and
Certainly.
Suddenly you find, in some cases, other things. That leads me to ask, does this ordinance, now soon to be in place, give you the ability to stop something that could have eventuated into something worse were that ordinance not in place?
It gives us the opportunity to investigate. It gives us the opportunity to take a second look into a scenario or a situation that certainly could have escalated or already headed in the direction that's something that's certainly more illegal, if you will, and onerous, if you will.
Some folks who were adamantly against this were concerned about the free speech part of this that you brought up. How do you, in the middle of a call, try and discern what side of the line this is on? This isn't easy.
Well, and so what they have given us is, again, a tool to utilize where officers can use but not only their background and their investigative techniques, but also they can take a scenario and make that decision using discretion. Do I have a violation or not? But importantly, many of these cases, case by case, if they actually do go to court, they are adjudicated in the court of law, not out on the street corner, and that's where they need to be adjudicated.
Okay, well, it gives you this leverage that you were discussing when we talked about this the first time that was lacking. So that's the situation with these transient folks whom you don't recognize and they come and go. Is there cooperation with neighboring municipalities, Kalamazoo, Marshall, Albion? Do you talk together and say, we've seen this situation, do you see it too?
I wouldn't say there's an organized discussion but there are multiple conversations at multiple levels. And when an incident does pop up where we see that the crimes committed are significant, human trafficking, for example, or trafficking in illegal narcotics or what have you, then suddenly that rises to the level that many of these teams, these interstate corridor teams, enforcement teams, start to talk right away about who the players are, where they come from, and more importantly, where is this being sourced?
How about the municipalities that border Battle Creek? Is there a concern that now that Battle Creek has this situation in place, that it just moves people across a border that's not all that far away?
There's always a concern, a jurisdictional concern about which side of the street someone's on and what you can and you can't do. And I think what normally is just a part of our routine exercise in law enforcement is all the chiefs start talking. We start sharing, how did we get this done? And I certainly would not be surprised if maybe here in the near future that folks from neighboring jurisdictions reach out and say, may we have a copy of this as they see how it progresses, and then they'll maybe move to model it.
All right. Well, we always appreciate the time. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you for having me.
Chief Jim Blocker, Battle Creek Police Department.